Back off! Back off! Back off! Back off! Back off! Back off! Hello, party people, my fellow movie fans. So this week, the movie, if you couldn't tell by the intro, is going to be the 1984 film Firestarter. And this movie stars Drew Barrymore as Charlie McGee, or Charlene. This is probably one of Drew Barrymore's most famous childhood acting jobs. Of course, her most famous is E.T. And playing Andrew McGee, or Andy McGee, is David Keith, not Keith David. Very different people, but if you're like me, we've all made the mistake. But of course, he was an officer and a gentleman. The Great Santini, The Rose, Brubaker. That's just things that he was in before or around this time. Still acting today. Very recognizable face. So those are your two main stars. You also have Heather Locklear playing Vicky McGee, the mother of Charlie, who don't look too close at Heather Locklear's age difference from Drew Barrymore. She is obviously not really old enough to be Drew Barrymore's mother. We do have Freddie Jones as Dr. Joseph Wendlas, Martin Sheen as Captain Hollister, Art Carney as Irv, Louise Fletcher as Norma. And then we have George C. Scott as John Rainbird in this movie, and Moses Gunn as Dr. Pinot. So for Firestarter, it is about the McGees when they were young. They were part of a government experiment that played with people's minds and gave them powers, much like, Stranger Things type of secret government activities. These were along the lines of rumored things that were happening during the 60s and 70s. Think Manchurian Candidate also. But they give them supernatural powers, and they end up having a child, Charlie, who herself has a supernatural power. She has pyrokinesis, which I'm not sure is a real thing, but if you can infer from telekinesis, pyrokinesis is a way to start fires with your mind. She also seems to have some sort of clairvoyance, being able to see the bad people coming. Her father is gifted with the gift of mind control, and I'm not really sure what her mother had. Her mother is killed early on in the movie, thus making Heather Locklear's part very small in this movie, only really at the beginning of the movie. And the government starts looking for Charlie. They want to control the McGees. They find out the daughter is blessed with a weapon-like ability, so they'd like to get their hands on her. And this movie comes as a basic father-daughter story on the run. They're running from the people of the shop, the mysterious government shadow agency that is run by Martin Sheen's character with the two doctors. And then you have George C. Scott's John Rainbird, who is basically a government assassin. So looking at the cast of this movie, it's pretty heavy hitters. It has a pretty good cast in it. I mean, you have Oscar winners. You have legendary George C. Scott. You have Martin Sheen, Louise Fletcher, Moses Gunn, and of course, legendary character actor Freddie Jones, who I believe is Toby Jones's father, and then a small part by Heather Locklear in her early to mid 80s heyday when she was quite the it girl. So you're thinking, a cast like that based on a Stephen King novel, this has to be good. And it's entertaining. I wouldn't exactly call it good, but it is definitely entertaining. There's a bunch of plot holes in this that with every viewing you're like, why would you do that? But it's still a fun watch, at least. And speaking of Stranger Things and this movie, you can really see a lot of things in Firestarter that obviously inspired the Duffer Brothers. And we all know that Stephen King is a major inspiration for the Duffer Brothers, but you'll see a lot of things with the character of Eleven that are taken seemingly directly from this movie. From her mind powers to basing it on and a lot of things have been based on that. Like I said, the Manchurian Candidate comes to mind, of the secret government agencies that dabbled in the mind control, telekinetic power as it will. So maybe that is not directly based, but things from, how Charlie uses her powers, how she looks when she uses her powers, to Charlie's dad, Andy, when he uses his powers, the powers he has, and to the bloody nose that he gets when he uses his powers. So at this point, we are getting into the mid-80s with Stephen King, and the budget of Firestarter was around $12 million, and it only makes just over $17 million at the box office, which, if you include marketing in that budget, it's not exactly a hit. It did much better in the very new home rental market. So that's where they really make their money back, as the home rental market. But it was a trend during the 80s that Stephen King movies, the further the 80s went along, you had diminishing returns on movies based on Stephen King works. And this is not even in the era where movie stars were making inflated costs to star in movies. But I can imagine with a cast like this, getting that cast is still a significant portion of this movie. And probably the other significant portion of this movie is the special effects that come with having to set a lot of things on fire. The director, Mark L. Lester, has said in interviews that this was by far the most difficult movie that he has ever made. And it is because all of the effects were practical effects. Of course, we probably all know this, in the early to mid 80s, there is no CGI making all those fires. They actually had to create, when you see fireballs in the movie, they had to create all of that, and they had to have a skilled pyrotechnician on this movie. I mean, the insurance cost alone, because the amount of people that are set on fire in this movie is probably tremendous. Especially since this is right after the era where, from the Twilight Zone movie, you had such tragic events happen with the practical effects and the helicopter scene in the part that was directed by John Landis. So Firestarter was initially to be directed by John Carpenter. He even wrote an early draft of the script for Firestarter. He wrote that script with Bill Lancaster, who co-wrote the script with him for The Thing. Universal Pictures executives ended up removing both of them from the project. And that was a direct result of the failure of the movie The Thing. There's even rumors that Carpenter at one point was in talks to play John Rainbird, which the part, of course, went to George C. Scott. There is a remake of Firestarter that was made in 2022, and John Carpenter and his son actually did the score for that movie. And speaking of the score for this movie, it is one of those early to mid 80s scores done by Tangerine Dream, so very heavy on the keyboards and that 80s sound that Tangerine Dream tends to give a score. So this is another Stephen King film that was produced by Dino De Laurentiis. He purchased the rights to the 1980 novel Firestarter from Stephen King, and he produced several Stephen King movies. He did not only Firestarter, but Cat's Eye, which is in 1985, also starring Drew Barrymore, Silver Bullet, Maximum Overdrive, The Dead Zone, and Sometimes They Come Back. So in casting news, the other people that could have been in this movie is Richard Dreyfuss. That is who John Carpenter originally wanted to play Andy McGee. And also Burt Lancaster was originally wanted for Captain Hollister. And a side note, Bill Lancaster, who is John Carpenter's writer for The Thing, who was working with him on a screenplay for this, is Burt Lancaster's son. Of course, that didn't happen. In the case of who could have played Charlie, there were several people up for the role, including Jennifer Connelly, including Heather O'Rourke, who is the little girl from Poltergeist. Drew Barrymore and her competed for several roles at that time. And this movie was shot on location in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is a place where a lot of films were shot. It saved them money from shooting in Hollywood in a couple of ways. It is a non-union state, so you didn't have union restrictions there. And also shooting costs in North Carolina are much cheaper than it is in California. That is a major reason why a lot of movies don't shoot in Hollywood today. So that is an ongoing struggle with Hollywood movies. So this was shot in the fall of 1983. It is actually the first movie that was shot in Wilmington, North Carolina, after the commission of the North Carolina Film Office to get them to get a lot more movies and the film industry to come to North Carolina. So this film is the launching of North Carolina as a film hub in the United States. Over 1,350 productions have been filmed in North Carolina since the filming of Firestarter, and critically mirrors what this movie did at the box office. It was not well received. It has an average middle rating, and for a lot of people, it too closely follows other Stephen King novels that were made into film with the psychic kind of powers, the Carrie, the dead zones of the world. Roger Ebert gave it 2 out of 4 stars. He found the movie boring. And Stephen King himself didn't like this movie either. He found it at that time the worst film of the bunch of movies that have been made out of his novels at that time. Even though Stephen King kind of worked on the film, gave his blessing, sort of supervised, he approved the script and everything, he just didn't like it in the end. And as for me, I found this fun when I was a little kid. I'm about the Drew Barrymore's age, and I always liked doing the back off thing when I was a little kid. And I know watching it now, and even back then, Drew Barrymore, and not to insult her, she was a little kid at this time. She had that little kid acting style. She has the same acting style in E.T., which is a movie I love. But I always liked watching Firestarter. I have no problems with it. There are just large plot holes of stuff like, why, when you're running from a government agency, would you hide in a cabin that used to be the grandfather's cabin? It seems like a easy place for them to find you. And there's other little things. It's not a great movie, but I always had fun watching it. I didn't find it boring. I even rewatched it now after not watching it for several years, and I found it still the campy fun that I found it before. And it does have some really good fire effects in it, as you would hope a movie called Firestarter would. And if you are going to base this on, it's a sci-fi, psychic, telekinetic horror movie, but as we've discovered in this series of Stephen King movies aren't really that scary, and Firestarter is not really scary itself. So it does fall in line with almost every Stephen King movie made of, if you're looking for something that will really, really scare or frighten you for a Halloween season, these are not the movies for you. But thank you so much for watching this. If you like this, please give me a thumbs up and leave me a comment. I love when you leave me a comment. I try to respond to everybody's comments. And if you like movies as much as I do, consider subscribing to the channel. But my name is Stacia. Thank you for joining me. See you next time. Bye.